All right, Matthew chapter 8. Looking at 3 or 4 verses here in Matthew chapter 8, starting in verse 23. Matthew chapter 8, I'm going to start reading in verse 23. And when he was entered into a ship, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with the waves, but he was asleep, referring to Jesus. And his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. And he saith unto them, Why are you fearful, O ye of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. But the men marveled, saying, What manner of man is this, that even the winds and sea obey him? Let's go ahead and pray. Father in heaven, Lord, I love you. Lord, I thank you for your word, and Lord, I ask your blessing now upon this time. Lord, I pray that you would meet the needs that are present. Lord, I pray if there's anyone here that does not know Jesus Christ as their Savior, Lord, I certainly pray that even today they would put their faith in him. Lord, I pray for those that need encouragement or whatever that need might be, Lord, I pray that you would work. Lord, I pray that you would help me to control what I say and how I say it. Lord, help me stay true to your word, and may you receive all the glory and honor. Father, I love you. I pray this in Christ's name. Amen. I believe it's in Mark chapter 4. Let me check there real quick. Do you have another account of this in Mark? I don't know if I'm going to read it or not. I'll read a portion of it in Mark 4. This example, this event here is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And in Mark, there's some other reading that I want to give to us. In verse 40, Christ is calming the storm, and he said unto them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly, and said one to another, What manner of this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? Now, I know there's been different times I know in my life, and I imagine it's true for the majority of us here, if not all of us here, when it seems you're trying to follow the Lord and do what's right, but there's opposition. You find yourself in the midst of a storm. You want to do what's right, but all of a sudden, your world starts falling apart around you. Or events take place that you just did not expect to take place, especially when you're trying to serve God and do what's right. And it always is amazing at times when you really determine that you're going to follow the Lord and follow God's call in your life, and yet you find yourself in the midst of a storm. I remember when we arrived in P&G, again, I can think of different events in my life, key phases in my life, and it's amazing how it coincides with at a time when I was, whether it's a different ministry beginning or I'm setting out to do something, surrendering to God's call, how there's always seemed to see a measure of opposition, a storm, if you will, that arose from the time we left for debutation, and all of a sudden, within 1 week, everything was just falling apart. And to the time we arrived in P&G, and all the preparations that I had made on 2 survey trips seemed to just disappear when we arrived in country, from having no power at all to no water at all, and to the malaria that came up, to the housing situation that happened, and again, I've just arrived in country and wondering, Lord, what's going on? What's going on? When we're trying to do right here, we're trying to serve you. And I'm sure many of us have different stories in our life when those times take place. As we see in our text here today, now the disciples have already been witnessing some amazing miracles of Christ. They've already seen his power over disease. They're getting ready to witness his power over nature, which is perhaps the most awesome display that they're going to see, with the exception perhaps of Lazarus and the 2 others that he raised from the dead. But this still just would have been incredible. Christ is, the last set of verses we looked at, of course, it was 2 men in Matthew, it was 3 men altogether that came to him, but he knew they really did not truly want to follow him. They weren't really ready for those storms that were getting ready to come up. And so, anyhow, they get into the boat, the miracles are done, and Christ is sleeping in the boat. And they're in the Sea of Galilee here. They're not in the Mediterranean Sea. They're in it's a lake. It's about 13 miles by 8 miles. And this lake is known for the rapid change that can take place. It's almost encircled by mountains. You got the Mediterranean Sea a little ways off to the west there. And so the winds could kick up in a rapid way. And this thing can get nasty very quick. It's still true to this day of how quick this lake can turn on you and get very violent. Matter of fact, it's interesting. Matthew's the only one that uses that word. The word for the tempest here, storm, is actually everywhere else. It is turned to earthquake there. So they're moving about. This was serious. And let's remember, the disciples who are with Christ, most of these men knew this lake. They knew the water. And so they knew when this thing hit, these men were genuinely afraid for their life. This isn't the first time they've been on water. All right, these would be Navy guys. These are guys that know this lake. So they know that, they are in some trouble right now, and they're afraid. And yet in the midst of all of this, Christ is asleep with his head on a pillow. This is not a very big boat. These are not big boats right here. He's back probably fairly close to where they even have to be controlling a portion of the boat. And he's sleeping in that portion of it right there. And it's the only time in the Bible we actually have recorded where Christ is asleep is in this example right here. And so he's asleep in the boat, and the disciples are, they're afraid. They're at the point now where they believe that they're going to perish. And so they go and they wake up the Lord. And the Lord immediately rebukes them, not for waking them up, of course, but for the fear that they had at that time. He says, well, why are you so fearful? Oh, ye have little faith? And after he rebukes them, he rebukes the storm and the wind. And a great calm immediately sets in. And right there, of course, what they just witnessed just would have been incredible. And they respond by saying, man, what manner of man is this? That even the winds and the sea obey him. He didn't call on anybody else. He just simply told the wind and the sea what was going to happen. I think we learn a lot here. I think there's a few things we're going to look at here about this text. I think we learn about storms and how it relates, one, in our Christian walk, and secondly, what we're going to look at, and perhaps more true to the point of the text, is how it affects our view of God when we're in the midst of storms. So anyhow, let's take a look at that today. First thing that I want to cover, though, is the fact that, of course, storms will come in your life. We say that, and I think we all have a head knowledge of that, but the reality is, because I know I've been there, when we're trying to do right, we're trying to serve God, and things don't go the way you expect, the way that you think that it should go, or the way that might bring you joy, or you're just trying to do right, and again, your world starts crumbling, and you're wondering why all of a sudden. We should not be surprised when storms come. Now, they come for different reasons. We could look at several different. There's two primary reasons. Usually, they can come like in Jonah, another guy who was asleep in the boat, but for an entirely, different reason there. But nonetheless, a storm came up, but that storm was produced for a different reason. That storm was of the Lord, and that was to correct that guy. That was self-induced. And you can absolutely have storms in your life that are self-induced, that are produced from disobedience or to somehow the Lord's trying to get your attention to bring you back. I was reading a story this week of he had built a little boat. He had it in a lake by his house, and it was getting too far out. And he wanted to get the boat back, but he could no longer reach it. So he had a good idea, and it worked. He started taking stones and tossing stones on the other side of the boat. Well, it caused ripples. And those ripples started bringing the boat back to the shoreline where he could finally reach it and get a hold of it. There's times when God has to be corrective in our life, and he sort of has to toss some things maybe to rough us up a little bit to get us back in line. Those are self-induced storms. But what we have here is not a self-induced storm. This is a storm that, obviously it's of the Lord, but many people think it was actually of Satan himself because of the rebuking that takes place of the sea and the wind here. I don't know if that's the case or not, but I certainly found that interesting because it was in direct opposition to the will of God and trying to thwart what was taking place. But nonetheless, this storm wasn't more for correction. It's more along the lines of perfection, of making us better, of seeing God for really who He is. And so don't be surprised when the storm comes. And I think when we're reading this, what I found interesting as well is the fact how, in all the accounts, how it was covered with the sea. In other words, why the disciples thought they were going to sink wasn't right at this point in time, wasn't because a rogue wave was going to hit them and tip them. Well, that was certainly a possibility. But the problem was the boat was filling up with water. And that'll sink you. In New Guinea, we always lost boats going back and forth between New Ireland and New Britain. And one of the primary reasons why, they'd have it a little bit too weighted down, and the boat would take on water, and the boat just sinks. Boop, and you're just in the water all of a sudden with no boat. And so the boat was taking on water right there. And as I read that, and you look at the words of it, I am thinking, this boat should have sunk already. And the disciples really should have realized that. They should have understood that. But what they were forgetting is the Lord is in the boat with them. He's in the boat. There's nothing that's going to happen to them that the Lord does not allow. Nothing. The Lord is not in danger here of dying. He's not. Listen, when you're following Him, when you're serving the Lord, when you belong to Him, He's in the boat. You understand that? He's in the boat. Our circumstances don't dictate for us. It's the reality of the Lord who is with us that does. So storms will come, but remember, the Lord is in your boat. So let's look at now how the storms and affects our Christian walk. What we learn about storms in our life from our text here and our walk with Christ. Number one, I think we see that storms reveal where your character is or how much character you have. I think it begins to show you where your walk with God really is. It is not the mountaintops in your life that reveal your character. It's the valleys. It is the difficult times. It is the challenging times. It is the storms in life. That's when sort of the mirror begins to come out. It's when the stress is piling up. It's when all those different events just seem to be crashing down around you, and that's when you begin to see where your character is. We see that here with the disciples. We can easily deceive ourselves and think we're doing great. I would imagine all of us have done this throughout our Christian life and thinking, man, I think I've got this thing down. I think I'm doing all right. And then before you know it, something comes up and you're crashing down. I think of Peter, of course, when he had told the Lord, Lord, I'm ready to die with you. Remember, he believed it. He wasn't lying at the time necessarily. It wasn't being hypocritical at that time, I should say. That's what he believed. He was wrong. And the Lord told him that. He knew he was being serious. He knew he wasn't saying that with feigned lips. He wasn't saying that with hypocrisy. He really believed that. But the reality was, he wasn't ready. And Christ knew it. Now, he got to that point in his life. And remember, I believe that night, outside of his conversion, was one of the most important nights in Peter's life because he did realize when he denied the Lord 3 times and their eyes locked, he realized that what he had wasn't enough. Wasn't enough. I think we see it with several different men in the Bible. I'll just bring up one more very briefly, and that is John Mark. John Mark heads out on the first missionary journey. He's ready to go. It doesn't last too long. It doesn't last too long, and he turns and he heads back. We don't know exactly what come up. We don't know what happened. We know it was somewhat controversial when he headed back because it leads to the separation at another missionary journey of Paul and Barnabas separating ways over this event what took place. So there are times in life when you're not necessarily ready for, you think you are, but then the Lord produces some storms in your life. But again, these are for helping us. These are for us to realize where we're at. Beginning to reveal our character, to see what portion of our life do we need to pray about more? What portion of our life do we need to give over to the Lord? Where are we at with our walk with Him? And the truth is there are times in storms when you will not understand what the Lord is doing. All right? You won't understand it. That'll happen a lot. The disciples here are thinking he didn't even care. He's sleeping in the boat. He's asleep. I mean, the boat's being tossed about, and he is asleep. And no doubt he was exhausted. I mean, he's coming off all the miracles. He is completely exhausted, and he's going to sleep. He knew the storm was going to be there. I mean, he's God. He knows exactly what's going to take place. The disciples certainly did not understand that. They wake him up thinking, Lord, do you not even care? Boy, were they wrong about that. I imagine it, to a certain extent, to what level it can, if you'll allow me to say this, that had even hurt him. That they would wake him up. He knows why he's on the earth. I mean, he's getting ready to take their place in judgment. And they wake him up and said, do you not even care? We're getting ready to perish here. Again, there's times when you just don't understand. Now, faith is what will determine whether you think the Lord does not care or you're resting in the fact that He's in control. It's where your faith is. What is it sitting in? Again, I think I'm not going to go into the story now, but that was what was so special to me about that bag of Doritos after that first 6 months in New Guinea when we were just struggling. I mean, going through the culture shock, all the problems were hitting, the malaria, and just surviving every day and just figuring out what in the world am I doing here. And then when I was sitting there and I saw that little bag of Doritos sitting on the shelf, again, I knew it was the Lord saying, I'm right here in the boat. I'm right here in the boat. You've forgotten about that. He's right there. If you belong to Him, He's right there. Again, some of you are facing some just incredible challenges right now. Listen, the Lord is right there. Don't forget that. Don't forget, you don't have to go to Him and ask Him, Lord, don't you care? He absolutely does. And He has a reason for why He allows what He does. And we don't always understand it. But we trust in who He is. In His goodness. In His holiness. In the fact of His omniscience. That He's all-knowing. That He knows what He's doing because He knows what's coming tomorrow. He knows what you're going to face 10 years from now and 15 years from now and 20 years from now. He knows what He has to get you ready for. Many times we can respond to fear in an unhealthy way. Or you can have, as we're going to see here, I almost did this sermon by way of contrasting different things here. A healthy fear and an unhealthy fear was one of them. And here we have an unhealthy fear, though, that is first brought up. And that was of the storm that was taking place. They were genuinely afraid, and that fear led them to make some wrong decisions. The fear began controlling. All right? The fear did. Sometimes fear can lead you right out of the will of God. It can lead you right out of it. Sometimes fear, it can hurt your relationship with the Lord. It can hurt your relationship with each other. Within your own family. I think when we were in P&G, Levi probably still does it this day. Where's he at? I don't know where he's even at, right? Where's he at? Oh, is he ushering? That's right, Levi, you're fine. The boy was scared to death of shots and pills. He was scared to death of shots and pills. Well, when you're in New Guinea, you cannot be afraid of shots and pills. You're going to get them, and you're going to get a lot of them. And if we got to give them to you, man, we're slapping it in that leg, and we're giving that thing to you. So when he would get malaria, the two ways we're treating this thing is going to be shots and pills. But he was so afraid, I kid you not, he would rather die of malaria than take a pill or a shot. And it was a battle every single time, especially for the pills. I mean, he just that thing just wasn't going down. It was literally Marion prying his mouth open, taking the pill, and boop, going halfway down his throat to get it down him. It was an unhealthy fear. It was a fear that was going to hurt him. He was afraid of the wrong thing. What he should have been afraid of was the results of not taking those pills and not getting that shot. But he didn't have that perspective at that moment. He was too much allowing the circumstances of the moment to dictate his thinking without stepping outside of that. Now, that's understandable, obviously, for a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old, as he's growing up in that. But too often we do the exact same things. We have a fear that comes about that's unhealthy. And it leads to wrong decisions in your life. Our decisions need to be based on faith and trust in who God is. He might be asleep in the boat at the time, but He's there. You understand? He has a reason why He is holding back. He has a reason why He is resting at this time. He has a reason for it. Faith is tied in to how you react to a storm. We see that in here. Faith is tied into how you react to a storm. I remember when one of the first times I got in a rough season on one of the little banana boats, I was coming back from an island called New Hanover. That missionary that was up in Caving at the time, Terry Thrun, had asked me to go and preach a meeting in New Hanover. So he went with me, and we traveled in, and we were coming out of New Hanover, and at this time, we knew enough to always check the sea. So we get out of this river, we get out of this island. We took the boat into a river, into this island for several hours. So we're on our way back home now. We get out of the river, we get to the ocean, and we stop for a little while on the beach and just looking at the ocean, and it looked fine. So he said, let's hit it, let's go. So we head out, and we were out about an hour. We stopped in just a little tiny island, just a little dot of an island. We took a rest there and got some coconuts and things like that. And we decided to head out. Ocean was still looking good. And so we get around this island, we get back in the boat, we head back around, and we just start off, and it changes in a heartbeat. And what you were afraid of wasn't rain. Usually when it rained, the sea was pretty calm. You just got wet, you didn't care. It was when the wind is what you were looking for. And boy, the wind picked up. And we're in open ocean getting back into it. Between New Hanover and the main part of New Ireland, you got a stretch of open ocean right there. And man, that wind kicked up. And I'm thinking, where is the nearest island? Can I possibly swim there? And we had several other people in the boat that were just giving a ride back to the main island underneath. And what always would make me nervous was when I saw the face of the boat operator. If he looked calm, I was all right. But when he was looking petrified, I was always worried. But I'm in the boat, and I want to start screaming, we're all going to die! But I started thinking, if we do get out of this, nobody's going to come to hear me preach. I was in the boat screaming, we're all going to die with everybody else. So I'm trying to maintain like everything's all right. Got faith. We're just praying. God's in this. But the reality is, I want to scream inside, we're all going to die. I know it. So it was a fake faith at that time. That was not a real faith on my part. It was absolutely fake, just in case I survived so I could still have a ministry when I got back to the island. But a storm like that, when circumstances arise, it does begin to show you where your faith is. It shows you how strong it is. It shows you if you really believe God is in control. It's easy to say that when you have your jobs going well, when your health is fine, when your kids are healthy. It's easy to say that. It's easy to say that. But when all of a sudden, when your spouse passes away, when one of your children are dying, boy, does faith become awfully important in your life. Remember this. He's in the boat. He's in the boat. We also learned from this, what I thought was interesting as I was just studying this over and over, what was encouraging me is we see a biblical view of safety. The safety of the disciples was not determined by the storm. It was determined by the Lord. See, we tend to view because we're human. We view it from a carnal. By carnal, I'm not meaning a sinful standpoint necessarily. The context I'm trying to use is just from a worldly, a carnal standpoint many times. That's how we view our safety. But if the Lord is in the boat, He's not bound by the circumstances. He's not bound by them. Storms help us to gauge where our faith is. The experience of a storm itself will strengthen your faith when the Lord does begin to work. And the irony here of this, or the amazing part of this, is the Lord wants to use that storm to show you really where it is, and so He can then strengthen it by what He's getting ready to do through that storm. He's going to use the same event that's leading you to question and to see where your faith is, and if you'll just take that first step and trust Him and stay in His will, He's going to use that very storm to strengthen your faith. Many times it is a result of seeing God calm a storm in our life that strengthens us for what He has down the road. Because again, life is, we tend to go from storm to storm to storm. Life isn't just all a bed of roses, especially when you're following Christ. Now, One of the main purposes of this, get to the last point here, is storms and how it demonstrates our relationship to Him. Remember what's taking place right now in the ministry of Jesus Christ. I mean, as we're coming through Matthew here, He is demonstrating who He is. We see who He is as we start off by His genealogy there in chapter 1. He has every right to be the Messiah. We see His divine approval at His baptism. We've seen Him prove who He was by the Sermon on the Mount with the wisdom with which He spoke. We've just seen His power over disease as He was healing every single thing that came before Him. He healed it. And now He's getting ready to demonstrate His power over nature. He wants the disciples to see who He is. He wants them to see who He is. I mean, again, when I get to heaven, I really want to go to the DVD room because there's several events I want to see, and this will be one of the very first things that I want to see. Would be when He calms the storm. I mean, just think of what's taking place here. This took place. They're in the boat. The sea is so rough. These are fishermen. These are men who know this sea. The boat is taking on water. They think that they're going to die. The wind is just tossing them every which direction. The Lord wakes up after He rebukes them. He rebukes the wind and the sea, and immediately it's glass. Do you understand the power that they're seeing at that moment in time? This is nothing like they've witnessed so far. Nothing. Nothing could compare to this. They're sitting there, one moment, the world is crashing, we're going to die, and bam, it's perfect. It's over with. The ocean is glass. They're getting to see a demonstration of who He is, and that was their conclusion. Behold, what manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea do obey Him. They're realizing this is God. They're seeing Him for who He is. Listen, we have a head knowledge of God in our life, but there's times in our life when He'll do things so you can realize even more, man, He is God and He is in control. The power of God is amazing, and He was showing it to them there. I mean, we look at the power of God in creation. I mean, right now, think of this. And sometimes it's funny to try and listen to those who don't believe in God try and explain this. The earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour right now. That's how fast we're moving right now, 1,000 miles an hour. Where's the propulsion at? Is there rockets attached to our planet right now spin us around? That for the last 6,000, 7,000 years here, we haven't changed speeds yet. Perfect. Well, that would be gravity because of the sun. Really? Really? You think that that's causing us to spin at 1,000 miles? Doesn't make sense. Because not only that, because you got another problem. Because why we're spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, we're moving at the same time. 67,000 miles per hour. That's what we're moving right now. 67,000 miles per hour. Spinning at 1,000. At the perfect distance from the sun. And we're not changing speed. I mean, God's power is evident everywhere. And we look to our scientific community, which is trying to base science without a creator, and so their conclusions can be totally absurd. When the evidence is right there. Its power is amazing. Today, we're too distracted. We spend too much time marveling at mud pits instead of the Creator. When a demonstration of who He is at times, again, it's all around us. And He wants us to see that. But we get so distracted by the things of this world. I mean, we think we impress ourselves. Again, we can launch a rocket into space. Whoa. Really, when you think about it, that is nothing. Then we marvel at our Jesus. Look at that Great Wall in China. Come on, really? Do you not look around the universe? And we marvel at our own creations and what we can do. We tend to do that in our own life. We tend to do that with our own life. With our, whatever it is, our own education, our careers, whatever it might be. We marvel at a mud pit instead of the Creator. We marvel at our own puny accomplishments and fail to see the greatness of God before us. But it is during those storms, again, that you have the opportunity to see the greatness of God. Now, what's interesting here, and this is one of the reasons why I also read in Mark. Mark said this, that not only after he calmed the storm, they had another fear now. And it was exceedingly great, this fear. The fear they have now, after the sea is calm, by the way, is greater than the fear that they had in the storm. But this is an unhealthy fear. This is a right fear. I mean, I assure you, it's much more fearful to realize you're standing in the presence of God than being in a storm in a boat. When you begin to realize, when He does whatever, however He intervenes and however He works in your life, and you realize God just worked. This is a fear that will help keep you on the right path. This is a fear that will lead you to trust even further as life goes on and the trials increase. Because what I like about Peter is, you see, Peter learned a lot here from this event right here. Because we're going to see him in prison in the book of Acts. And now who's the one sleeping in the midst of a storm? It's Peter. It's Peter. I believe he was exhausted. I don't believe that was sin that he was asleep in a storm. I believe it was a demonstration of faith. God has this. He has it. He's in control. When they saw His power, it produced great fear. You know, and I think the whole response the Lord was going for right there. Again, just to imagine this taking place with the ocean, the ocean going there. And again, I think of the times when we've been out there in the banana boats and the weather turned and just got bad. To be able to have an opportunity to witness, to have all of a sudden in a moment at the speaking of His Word, just complete calmness. I mean, the power that would have to go into that is incredible. And what he was going for in the whole response, and it's true in the storms of our life, because when it took place, and they're afraid for their life, and then all of a sudden it's calm when they heard him just speaking. That's all he did. He just rebuked the sea and the wind, and it was over with. They marveled. You see, one of the reasons for storms in our life is so we can marvel at God. He knows we're going to go through it. All right? That's part of it. What He wants to do is use it in a way that you'll marvel. That you'll be able to look back and say, man, I can't even comprehend the God that I serve. I think it's also interesting that God proportions the greatness of the calm according to the power of the storm. The calm that was needed is exactly what He gave. It was complete. It was what was needed. They learned an amazing lesson that day that would carry them through for the years to come. With the exception of Judas, who would betray Christ, who was not truly converted. All of them are going to be martyred. With the exception of John, who they tried to kill, and he was banished. And so he went through, incredible struggles in his life. But all these men are going to be martyred for their faith. And Christ knows when they get on that boat, they're happy. They think everything's great. They're in ministry with Christ at this point in time. And it's been going on. We're actually getting close to 2 years by this point. And they think, man, this is great. But Christ knows how far away they are for where they need to be for what is coming in their life. And He knew the necessity of the storm. He knew this necessity of the time where He had to be asleep in the boat. Because He knows there's going to be times when they're going to be wondering, Lord, where are You? And He wants to have that reference for them. So they can go back and say, no, He might not be active right now, but He's here. It's all right. He's here. The storms will come. But remember, God, Christ is right there in the boat. And you can respond in different ways to those storms. Again, the Lord wants to use the storm in your life to perfect you, to strengthen your faith. He doesn't want it to be an idea of something that prevents you from a service. By no means. Please, you have to try and keep this world in perspective. Right now, this is the only world we can see, we can touch, we can feel, we can hear. But this is such a short time that we're here. Very short. We've been translated into a new kingdom. That's a reality. And as Paul said over and over, and in context, he was dealing with all the storms of his life there in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. All the hardship that he was going through. And he said, listen, the reason why he was fine was he kept his eyes on the eternal and not on the temporal. He realized one day all the storms would be over with. And he had been redeemed. Eternity was his home. It will all be over with one day. The things that we're facing right now, the challenges that you have in your life right now, it will come to pass. For those of us, again, who know the Lord, we have His promise. We have His peace. We have His protection. We have Him in the boat. So as you're going through those tough times in life, before you allow an unhealthy fear